Good afternoon, eller god ettermiddag. We'll try to do this in English with a little Norwegian accent, unfortunately. We'll shortly invite a very interesting person on stage. For me, who spent like the last 15 years looking for people that can things I don't know anything about. I can't really do it myself, so I need to hire somebody to do it. I'm looking for more smarter, brighter, and better-looking people. This is sort of a really good time to be here and to be able to present Tim in a little while. And Tim Pool is not the kind of person looking for problems. He's sort of looking for solutions, which is quite interesting for the business, I think. And when he live streamed from his smartphone for 21 hours during the demonstration on Occupy Wall Street, it was sort of showing what you could do with just a smartphone and not so much, not a big team, not a lot of cars and all those things that the TV station has. It shows what you actually can do if you have the guts and the willingness to try something. He made it so good, so even the big magazines and newspapers and TV stations started to write about him. And you know that if we, the old people, start to write about the young people, they have done something really incredible. Tim, who now works for Fusion, he used to be with Vice before that. He sort of tried to get so close to what happens as possible, to tell the story so close to those people attending the story as it is possible. And instead of standing like sitting in a helicopter or standing like on 50 meters away, he's where it happens all the time. We saw that in Baltimore a week ago. It was heating up a bit there, and we was a bit worried that he couldn't make it to Bergen. So we tried to make some other arrangements, but it worked. Things calmed down in Baltimore, and he made it here yesterday. And we could see that there is always some sort of criticism towards the legacy media. At least I can see it when in some of his reporting. And for those of you that have heard me for the last 15 years, talk about TV reporters, old men, suits, standing with a microphone in front of something, talking about things they don't really understand. Tim uses stronger words than I do about that. We can talk about that later. So, I would like to introduce to you Tim Pool from Fusion. We try to do this as sort of a conversation, and we're opening for questions as soon as you like, instead of waiting to the last 2 minutes and 45 seconds. If you have good questions, come with them. Should we start by you telling us a little bit about what you're doing and who you are?
Yeah, let's, do we have the monitor up? Cool, so this is me. As you just heard, I did a live broadcast from Occupy Wall Street for 21 hours straight the day that the police came in and evicted the protesters. So before that, I was mostly filming with my cell phone, posting to Twitter and Facebook. Things to me were totally normal for a millennial youth in the United States, I guess. I had heard about what was going on. I was particularly interested to see what it was. It wasn't so much political as just curiosity. And in doing what most young people did, I just posted photos and shared what was going on. But I really wanted to understand, so it was eventually someone came up to me and said, "Hey, you do really great journalism." And I was like, "Oh, is that what I'm doing?" Cool. I had no idea. But out of just practicality, I started live streaming. It was difficult to store so much video. My cell phone only had 16 gigabytes. I didn't have enough data to upload high-definition video to YouTube, but using Ustream, I was able to actually broadcast at lower quality, but to get the information out. So I want to show you this is a video from when I was working at Vice a year ago, and this is probably the most emotionally charged part of live streaming that I have. So we'll just watch this for a second. This is an understanding for those that haven't seen my coverage of what it looks like.
That's shooting.
That's real shit. Yes.
No, like
We're good.
Shit.
Come here. We've got live fire. Large successions of live fire. Go. So that was probably the craziest example I could give you. We were in Ferguson, and you can tell the camera's really shaky. We were getting shot at with actual bullets, and we were, you can't really tell, but I'm behind a large like transformer box that controls street lights. And I'm holding the camera, so you hear me talking, you don't see me. And the journalist in front of me on the ground yelling, he's actually a friend of mine, but, so this, just a real quick example from Baltimore. So again, you notice a lot of 11:08 p.m. here at Fulton and North Avenue. Car fire in the street, some pops going off. We're here at the site of the Baltimore riots. Oh shit, is that a Bearcat? At the police? So it's very candid, I guess. You hear me swearing. I try really hard not to swear, but I guess when a police armored vehicle starts pulling in, what had happened was, we're at the intersection, there's cars on fire, there's people throwing bottles, we're being threatened. A police APC called the Bearcat pulls up, and they start immediately bombarding it with projectiles. So that's when I start swearing. I try not to, though, I promise. And then I'll just do a real quick clip of, this is looking at, so beyond live streaming, I'll say this. Live streaming happens when there's so much going on, I can't tweet fast enough. I can't post to Instagram fast enough. So that's when you see those live streams. This video right here, which is, you'll see me actually hosting and standing off camera. You can see me shaking, holding my phone. This is shot with professional Canon. In some kind of armored vehicle, and So this is what it looks like for the viewers who are coming back and trying to watch after we have 21 hours of raw footage. This was shot by a friend of mine, Adam Krigler, who had come down, and he's shooting with a professional camera, and then we make a short edit to give you a recap of what was going on. But for the most part, what you'll really see from my coverage is going to be tweets. So, like I said, if I can't tweet fast enough, that's when it becomes apparent that live streaming is probably the most important option, or Instagram, which is more for a photo that will exemplify the full day and not necessarily the breaking news.
Yeah, just break in. What kind of impression did the audience get from following the incidents in Baltimore on Fusion or with you, or on legacy media?
I think, I know as much as you said, there's a lot of criticism. I think what you're going to get from legacy media, the traditional broadcasters, is a quick overview. You'll see some B-roll, some footage showing you what's going on, and someone will explain to you the gist of what happened. If you're watching, say, CNN or one of the big 24-hour networks that do have live people on the ground, often you don't get into what we just did. So I think it comes down to organizational and personal choice. I'm willing to go and stand next to cars that are on fire with men in masks threatening me with bottles and police firing on the other side that some news organizations don't want to do. But this is something we see conflict reporters do all the time. They're willing to get as close as possible. For whatever reason, I'm not going to presume to know, the legacy media companies tend to stay far back. So we have an example from Ferguson. When I was down on the ground, the night before, actually, clip I just showed you, we did have live fire, and me and a few other conflict journalists were diving on the ground and hiding before taking tear gas from the police. The police had launched tear gas in our direction. CNN was about 2 blocks away from where this was happening and had reported that the police were throwing smoke bombs, where I was live streaming to tens of thousands of people concurrently that we were taking tear gas and coughing and sneezing. So in being able to have a low budget, on the ground, live perspective into what's happening, you're more likely to see, I can say the information is closer to accurate than a news organization who's several blocks away in the press safety zone who can't actually feel or smell or see what's happening.
Yeah. But is the they are throwing in like, I mean, tons of people. It's like 4 or 5 people in a team working for a TV station. What do you think when you see them? It's like, do you like to be a part of that at some time, or is it?
No, I mean, well, I have a team. Actually, I have a producer sitting in the front, Valerie. Hi. So I work with people, and the idea for what we do is less about having a bunch of people, a crew come down to try and produce a segment, and more about each individual has a task that works in the scale of the immediacy of information. So first and foremost, it's what I do. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, sometimes Vine, although with Snapchat I've been doing less Vine, and live streaming. This is getting out the most immediate information from a breaking news event. It's as fast as we can get it done. Beyond that, one of my producers will work on shorter form video on demand, like the clip you saw of, I believe this one, of where I'm, you know, more hosting, and it's more candid, and but again, I'm in front of the camera. And then we have the longer term, bigger picture, which is what is the full context, you know, the hour-long documentary that encompasses this big breaking news event that we can put together. So, you know, when I look at these traditional news crews, they're usually comprised of people who are, you have 4 people doing the job I'm doing. Albeit they've got more people doing phone calls and setting up interviews and working on that news segment for 10 o'clock. But when it comes to the live breaking stuff, I can do all of it. And then when it comes to the producer working on the VOD, it's filming and editing and putting that out, and the editor who's doing the bigger documentary. I feel like we're sort of taking all of these different jobs and just putting them into one person each.
We could see from your Twitter stream in Baltimore that you were quite harsh, I would say. You wrote that this is not the real, this is no longer a dangerous situation, it's a media crisis. You wrote something about,
Media circus at North and Penn in Baltimore. So this is another thing that's interesting in, I think, how digital media changes with social, how news changes with digital media. When, at least in my experience, when you look at how citizen journalists, independent journalists, and even activist or advocate journalists approach a situation, the attitude of the citizen and independent and many of the activist journalists is, I know there's an event happening, and I want to go watch it. I want to go film it. I feel like many of the traditional journalists are sort of told, hey, here's the story, go cover what's happening. And what you end up getting, and maybe I have a better video. Well, you can see my tweets. We are leaving. This isn't news, it's a media circus. And this is just a video of me talking about it. But in Baltimore, when I go down there and I covered this for 3 nights, we had 50 or so members of the news media who were standing in the middle of the street. There were no protesters. There might have been 1 or 2. The intersection was closed for the most part because journalists were there to film the police and the protesters. So even though nothing was happening, it's still their job to go down there and film the police presence, and they sort of ignore themselves. So we saw a very similar thing in Ferguson, and I saw a very similar thing in Turkey. There's large groups of people with cameras totally oblivious to the fact that they have become a massive part of the story. And in the case of Ferguson and Baltimore, the police were directly giving orders to the press. Media, you have to disperse, you're blocking the intersection. When I see that happen, as someone who's just approaching it from a social media standpoint, I'm thinking, wow, here's what's happening. A bunch of journalists are blocking the street. So I step back from all of them and I film it. But most of these journalists will stay clustered together, ignoring the police orders with the mentality, I'm a journalist, I'm not part of the story, I'll just take my photos. And like I said, in Ferguson, we saw the same thing in Baltimore. Ferguson, there was 50 or so journalists standing on the sidewalk, taking pictures of the police. As the police said, media, there's no one, like, what are you doing? There's no one here, nothing's happening. But it creates kind of like a Chinese finger trap in that the police can't leave because 50 people are blocking an intersection, and the journalists don't want to leave because there's 50 police officers in riot gear standing in front of them. And that's when I say, this video, we're leaving. It's just time to go.
Why do you think it's like this? Is it like because it's so expensive to go there for them, or is it like, I mean, you carry around like some small equipment and that's it, and they come with all the big stuff?
I think that's part of it. I think it has to do with editorial independence. Being able to post, this is what we're seeing, and I can move on to this in a second, is people are posting news through individual channels. So I have @TimCast on Twitter, on Snapchat, I'm posting my story for more videos, which are much more fun, by the way. Instagram. So if you want to follow the news, you don't have to go to a website. You can see the breaking news directly from my social channels, which means I have a lot more control. When I'm going to publish a story, it doesn't have to be sent back to a producer or editor when it's breaking news. It just goes straight to my channel, straight from my phone. And that means I require less permission. So a lot of these journalists who are on assignment are told specifically, we need B-roll of these police officers. They're not going to leave when they have to do their job. And short of calling in, which takes time, and they're still standing there and saying, here's what we're seeing, what should we do? And then the person they're calling might not know what's happening, might not see it, and say, just stay there just in case. We don't know what's happening. The police are still out? Okay, just give it time. Whereas, for me, it's like, I'll make the call. There's just journalists, get out of here.
You're talking about the media being sort of part of the story there, and they are sort of following the part of the story that looks dramatic instead of cooling it down when something happens. You showed me something on Twitter earlier today about like...
Yeah, let me see if I have the... So an interesting thing occurs. Where is it at? An interesting thing occurs in... I guess now I can criticize my own work, and you guys can see this. Let me... I think I lost it somewhere in here. So as I look for it, there's a thing that I refer to as a timeline bias or a breaking news bias. And as soon as I find these videos, I can better explain it. But what happened was the protesters in Baltimore had started to, had started to move towards a highway. They went onto the on-ramp. And as you can see right here, they're taking the highway. So I tweeted, now, protesters are going onto the highway with a video showing them doing this. And this video got 46 retweets, 13 favorites. Not even a minute later, the protesters backed off. And I posted, now, protesters pull back off and leave the highway. Well, this only got 32 retweets. So this is sort of one of the pitfalls of how breaking news is being segmented through social media, in that everyone wants to feel empowered, and they want to believe in these protesters who are fighting for justice. So they're more likely to retweet something that shows the protesters taking ground. They're taking the highway. We did it. Yes, go protesters. They retweet it. But sure enough, another video within less than a minute, most people don't want to retweet that, or it's their bias. They don't think about it. And actually what we saw from this video, several hours later, a high-profile account with tens of thousands of followers tweeted that the protesters had taken the highway because this is the only video they had seen. So what ends up happening is people, they want to, even individuals, as much as I said the news organizations do this, they have an idea of what the story is, but the average person does too. And the average person is more inclined to share something that makes them feel a certain way. So in this instance, this video makes people feel empowered, and if it's something they believe in, they want to share it, or if it's something that makes them angry, they disagree with it, they want to share it. But this one is sort of, the video of them pulling back from the highway is sort of a negative emotion. It makes people who support the protesters feel like they're losing ground. And it doesn't make anyone angry who doesn't support the protesters, so there's not much reason to share it. And like the famous quote, the lie travels halfway around the world before the truth put on its boots.
Do you see the sort of the technological advantage you had a few years ago when you did live stream before everybody else, or at least really early? You did live streaming from drone quite early. That is sort of technology is in a way catching up. You have Periscope, you have Meerkat. What will that do to the industry, and what will it do to the sort of the advantage you had?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if I wasn't apprised to all the latest trends. So, I did a live broadcast from a drone in 2011, and in the United States, commercial use of drones is still illegal. So news organizations, as much as they want to, they still legally are not allowed to do it. But news organizations are advancing, and there's a lot of red tape they have to deal with being so large. That gives smaller independent crews, or even, as I am now with Fusion, Director of Media Innovation, I'm still able to make my own calls and rapidly utilize new tools in my reporting. It's a large advantage over a structured newsroom that they do good work, but when something new comes along, they're not set up to ingest this kind of content. And what's interesting in this is, as I said before, more and more people are consuming news through individual channels. And this does a few different things. One, brands are there's more people following individuals who cover news than there are following the brands. Amongst all journalists on Twitter, Instagram, and all the platforms, there's hundreds of millions. So where we are today, there are still brands that are particularly powerful. But a lot of brands, you can actually look at the numbers of how many followers their influencers have versus how many they have. Today, the numbers are still in favor of some of the big brands like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Vice. But when you look at a newer company like Fusion, which is a couple years old, the influencers for Fusion dramatically outpace the follower count for Fusion because the company's new. So not only do influencers grow followings faster than brands, but any new brand that starts today is most likely going to hire talent who has more followers than they do, which presents interesting problems. When I go out and report, like this video, which is a video straight from Twitter, there's very little, you can look at this, you can't tell that I work at Fusion. But when we go to Instagram, so this is actually an app that I developed to help alleviate the symptom. This photo uses an app that I developed called Tagly, and you can see the Fusion logo, you can see Timcast in the bottom left with Delwood, United States. This is just outside of Ferguson when a building was being burned down. The point is, at the time I worked for Fusion, and by using this app, I open the app, I take the picture, and I share it. And it will instantly have the brand information on it. This is going to be important as more and more people are consuming news through individual channels. What incentive is a news organization going to have to send out reporters to cover some of the biggest stories if they're not getting any real value from it?
We don't have to talk too much about money because Fusion is owned by ABC, which is partly owned by Disney, and that's why you shouldn't swear so much. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Well, I shouldn't swear because there's more articulate ways to get ideas across.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. But is it, we always discuss where's the money? Where's the money in this? Where is how can anyone make a living from this when it's not the brand that owns everything? I mean, Timcast is on YouTube, is on Twitter and Snapchat, and Fusion is sort of just a small part of it.
Well, some of the social platforms are particularly difficult. Right now, I think one of the hardest, and I mean, Snapchat is probably my favorite thing right now. It's so much fun. With a platform like Snapchat, you can have a very, very personal experience into the news, into the news gathering, job, I guess. And it's fun. It's funny. It's personal. But how do you monetize a video that doesn't last all day, and that you post it and it's literally 10 seconds of something happening? So when I look at breaking news, I think first and foremost, breaking news is about, are you worth listening to? Do you do good work? Because if you're not covering news appropriately, if you're not good at what you do, why should I care about what everything else you're saying, what the other things you're talking about are? Looking at an app like Tagly, it makes it easier to get some real, tangible value out of social content. So, which is why I made it, and it's free. We're not trying to, but it's free to use, and news organizations can easily get their brand value. So, what you get from breaking news typically is marketing. It's showing people that you care about these issues, that you're there on the ground, that you're producing information, and like the old slogans, you heard it here first. That's kind of the point. A more obvious solution is why I just pulled up YouTube. So one of the big changes I think we have for the future, and exactly what I've been saying before, that more and more people are seeking out individuals for their news. It creates an opportunity for creating youtube.com/Timcast, which is a YouTube channel revolving around my coverage from various places. When we produce a larger documentary that's about an hour long, that goes to the brand channel. It's an hour-long special. It airs on TV. But the short videos where, like the one from earlier where I was, walking around in Baltimore, or we did an interview with a gang member, these just are quick videos that we put out that will go up on YouTube. And the goal here is the YouTube channel itself is a show. It's a show for the people who are following me on Twitter, who know where my content is, and they want to see video-on-demand stuff that they can't. Not everyone can watch 13 hours of raw coverage or 21 hours, but you can watch a 2-minute video when you have time. And YouTube, of course, is monetizable very, very easily for most people. You can be in the partner program, or for a larger organization like Fusion, Timcast is part of the Fusion multi-channel network, which is relatively small. I think it only has a few different channels for the shows that Fusion is doing, which is, it's normal. Most big brands that have different shows will create their own YouTube for each show, but then they can monetize against the views for this content. So it's fairly traditional, I guess.
How can the the old kind of media? What can we learn from you? What can we learn from the new players?
Oh, man.
Like Vice Fusion, all the others.
I think, for me, the most important thing in telling a story is transparency, authenticity, and relatability. When I look at traditional news, and I hope this isn't offensive, I just see strange people in expensive clothes talking in a funny way. So here's the thing. When I'm on Twitter, when I'm on YouTube, I see someone who's kind of like me, who's telling me, here's why I think this, here's why I'm saying this, and it's clear to see if this person is just telling their opinion. Oh, they're sitting in their bedroom and they have an opinion. That's cool. I'm interested to hear what other people think about this. Or you have someone who says, I live in Baltimore. I don't know too much about, these protests, but here's what I just saw. And it's sort of, hey, look, there's an eyewitness on the ground telling me what's happening. So it's easier to trust someone you feel is like you than someone who looks like they're in a class above you speaking as an authority. I feel, when I watch someone else report news, just a citizen journalist, I'm like, it's easy to tell if they're an activist because they usually just say they are. Or it's just somebody who said, I recorded this, I was outside and I filmed this, here's what I saw. There are obvious pitfalls, and that comes in, there is some very important training that people who do journalism, or I should say that there are certain practices in journalism that make a journalist particularly trustworthy. And you can find these naturally in some people, but oftentimes you do end up with some citizen journalists who make blanket statements without enough facts. And it happens, but I think at the end of the day, we're looking at tens of thousands of people versus one person. And it's much easier to trust a large group who's saying, we all saw something slightly different, but I can sort of form a picture around it, versus one person who you don't really relate to and you don't necessarily trust.
What would you do if you were to take this to like Syria? I mean, it's probably not the right place to go, but it's a bit more messy than Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the most important things is that the places that I go and cover are, for the most part, developed. And that means there's an opportunity with strong cell connection to tell a story in real time, very rapidly, with high definition images. In many places, I was in Venezuela, I was only able to tweet some text. They don't have a strong enough cellular network to actually do live broadcasting, so in that case, you need more advanced technology. Syria, unfortunately, has some of the similar problems, but mostly due to the fact that it's war-torn. So there are opportunities in doing mobile broadcasting using portable broadband global area network, little satellite boxes, but then it gets close to being expensive. You're spending around $20 per minute. So you're really going to need an organization if you wanted to go somewhere that dangerous.
But if you were to go to like a place like Syria or some other really messy places, what would you do? Is like, would you bring your own stuff, or would you get some? How do you work?
So I talked to a journalist once, and I'm not going to name names, and they told me they went to Syria and they brought their iPhone and their laptop, and so I'll just say this: the biggest change, the most important thing that's going to happen to journalism, that has happened because of mobile technology, digital and social, is security. And we've got a large working class, journalists, media professionals who don't know a thing about computers. I mean, sure, we all know how to operate our Macs and our Windows machines, but you'd be surprised how many journalists don't know what a uniform resource locator is, even though they use them every single day. And that means when you go, it's URL, it's what you type in the web box for those that didn't know that. When you go to a place like Syria, they have powerful cybernetic armies. I mean, the US Cyber Command, it's our military computer division. There's rogue factions like the Syrian Electronic Army that work in the interest of Syria and its allies. I will say, first of all, I would never bring my own personal devices. Really, if you go into a conflict zone with any conflict zone, you really want to be opening that box and tearing that plastic off on that computer. You want to boot that phone up for the first time. And that doesn't mean that they're still not going to hack into your systems, into your emails. But all of those things you have stored on your computer, even things you think you deleted, they're going to get. And I say this because I know how to do it. And that's an advantage. So, a backstory. I'm a hacker. I grew up with computers, and so I build robots. But social engineering, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, it's so easy. It's so easy. But even beyond that, I have a little device. I didn't bring it with me. It's called a rutabaga. It's made by this man in, I believe he's in California. And he calls it the hotspot honeypot. It's about this big. You turn it on, and it will start intercepting the Wi-Fi signals and I believe cellular signals of the computers within around 50 meters. So I could just take it. I could put it under someone's chair right here and just get access to any computer that's open and running Wi-Fi. If you've got Bluetooth, I mean, even thinking about security without actually hacking. Most MacBook computers will automatically run Bluetooth, and your name is on that MacBook. So if you're in a hotel, you're in a conflict zone, and I'm a government agent sitting in the lobby trying to figure out who's telling what stories and preempting them, all I got to do is turn Bluetooth on my iPhone. Oh, John and Jane Doe are here. Well, we know that their company is going to be putting out a story. Let's see what we can do to preempt that. More importantly, it's easy to break in through Bluetooth and steal your information. So I'll just stress again, it's sort of terrifying to me when I hear some of the most famous, the loudest and most well-known journalists in the world are going to Syria with their personal iPhone without security. They're meeting with sources. They're meeting with rebels. And I told them, I said, look, if you bring a personal device in Android and iPhone, just assume that whoever is in opposition to the story you're telling is going to have access to everything you're doing.
Scary. If you have questions from the audience, you're welcome to raise your hand, and we're glad to take them. What is your own, you're living in a quite new world, I would say, and you tell me you use Reddit, you use Twitter, but do you have a TV moment from your life that you remember?
TV moment?
You know TV, you see the big screen at home?
Like when I was watching TV?
Yeah, like something that you remember
from TV? I mean, I was 14 and sleeping on my living room sofa when I woke up at 9 in the morning and saw 9/11 happen. That was TV. I mean, but this was early. This was 2001. We didn't have cell phones, and now, when we look back at what happened then, we have footage from all over the place because people are saying, "Oh, everyone had cameras at this point. There were more cameras available." And now think about it. We had a lot of footage from when incidents like that happened. But now when we think about Occupy Wall Street, we've got 4 different live streams of raw footage of what happened at this protest, probably hundreds of thousands of hours of footage from every different angle. It's going to be how we sift through it. That's going to be, the data's there. Let's figure out how to use it. The future will be fun, I'm sure.
Sure. Got a question down there?
Yeah. So now, in the wake of Baltimore, and we see kind of the power of using video to hold police accountable. But I think the flip side of that would also be that police can watch, live streamers and see where protesters are going and whatnot. So how do you navigate that tension while you're covering?
I mean, the technology is neutral. It's what we do with that is good or bad. The police are live streaming. They're not just watching live streams. They're actively buying those Live View backpacks and walking around with cameras and live streaming. And it's going back to their headquarters. I think, when we first started seeing the live streams, they were just, hey, turn the computer on and watch. And they're watching Twitter. And we know the private security companies do that too. But now they've actually said, hey, let's just live stream it ourselves. But at the same time, as much as there's a lot of criticisms to be made about the police and the recent, a lot of what happens in the United States for sure, and around the world, we can't just outright presume that everyone is bad and that the use of the technology will be immediately bad. I think, they're walking around protests with live stream cameras is a bit unnecessary. The NYPD has a unit called TARU. I believe it's like a Tactical Assistance Research Unit or something. And they just film. They use it for evidence when an agitator throws something. And it seems like that would be good enough. I think when we get into the discussion of surveillance versus surveillance, meaning Big Brother or the people watching, the real issue is the distribution of power. So when a special interest, be it a private organization or a government, controls the live stream or they control the surveillance footage, they can determine whether or not they want the public to know about it. So in the instance of police, the argument against body cameras, or not necessarily against, but the police can say, we don't have footage, the camera broke, or it wasn't recording. Now, if the cameras are distributed amongst multiple different interests, well, it's more likely that information will reach, the view of the public. And I guess that's it. It is what it is. Hopefully, having cell phone cameras and live streams be available to everybody, it will just offset any, misuse by special interests.
Got one more question?
Tim,
Please.
so interesting to listen to you. In Norway, we have legacy media. As you said, I understand you're not a big fan of 9 o'clock news. In Norway, we have legacy media with 9 o'clock news and 700,000 viewers. Kind of a big question, but what should they do? Will they survive, or will they die? And if they survive, what should they do?
Well, I think
what's the problem? That's the one question. I just want to follow up with another thing as well. If time, and that's the thing with technology that you mentioned. You said backstory after half an hour. You say I'm a hacker. Quite interesting. And I mean that if we not start to educate our journalists in technology as well, we will have a big problem. The business will die. So that's the second question. Thank you.
I think.
Well, I think what's the problem? That's the one question. I just want to follow up with another thing.
So. This is for my wristwatch. I didn't mean it for it to cut in right away, but my watch is actually doing the live broadcast you're seeing right here. and now I'll answer the question. I don't know if I'll say this: Will the news media with all its viewers and 9 o'clock news survive given a long enough amount of time? Probably no. I mean, most things change, So it seems likely with the current trends in how young people are consuming media. That television isn't going to last in the way that it is now. It's interesting in that when breaking news happens, people turn their TVs on. They're turning on Twitter, but for the most part, it's what's on CNN, what's on these networks, and it's the fastest way to get it. But the problem is, how is it sustainable if breaking news is very difficult, if possible, to monetize? How do we sustain a business? It's tough. Yeah. They're watching YouTube probably, right? Yeah, YouTube, Netflix. Yep. And Apple TV. Yeah, me too. Well, I mean, it's funny. I get really shocked when I've had a few instances of 13 and 14-year-olds know who I was because they were on YouTube and they saw a video of the news and they're like, oh, he's the guy doing news. But they're not going to turn on cable and watch Wolf Blitzer or something. So a lot of companies are trying really hard to get into television, especially in the United States, and it's safe to say that it's not crazy to do so because television will probably last for a while. There's a lot of arguments to be made about why that is, whether or not people actually want to watch it, or if it's just because the ad dollars are there. But I think it'll do what it needs to do for a while. But we're getting into the era of the smart TV. I can turn on my TV and it's got Netflix already pre-programmed into it. How do we put breaking news into Hulu, Netflix, YouTube? So for YouTube, I can say that's what I'm doing. And so my vision of the future will be young people will just go to my YouTube page and they'll see the latest news, similarly how to the older generation turned on television. So we'll see what happens. But as it goes with technology, we already have a huge problem in that security is really, really bad. You can never be 100% secure, but it's problematic for political reporting and conflict reporting because the interests that don't want you telling that story can easily make you not tell that story. I knew some guys who worked in Turkey. They were working on stories out of southern Turkey and Syria, and their fixer disappeared, and they lost their story. They don't know what happened. He didn't take the money they had given him just turned up, at the hotel. The guy was gone. So whatever happened, it was apparent, if you were to ask me, that they compromised this person's security because they didn't know what they were doing, and the story disappeared with it.
Last and final question. What will be the next big thing? I mean, you're live streaming from a wristwatch.
Yeah, you can't really see what it is, though, but it's kind of crazy, right?
It's pretty lousy, but it's...
Yeah.
Will we see anything like the next year during the elections in the US in 2016, for instance, that will be surprising to us from what we know today?
Well, what we saw in 2012 was really interesting because YouTube ran a live show with some of its personalities discussing politics, and I think the interesting thing is one of their personalities, Philip DeFranco, was actually talking a lot about Gary Johnson, who is not one of the two parties we're used to. So, what's particularly interesting to me is as we have distributed media. I'm wondering if the two-party system, that we have, will be as relevant in the future as more and more people start to freely talk about, I mean, you know, and that's pretty much it. The elections for us only happen, the presidential happen every 4 years. So every 4 years is another huge stride in the media practices of young people. So in 2012, live streaming from YouTube. I'm wondering how YouTube is going to work in this election, how apps like Livestream and Periscope, Twitter, Instagram, who are just bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm really interested to see what they do with Snapchat. So I think no matter what happens, every election we're pretty surprised, at least in the past decade or so, every election we're going to be really surprised with the technology because it's all changing so fast.
Thank you very much. Team Pool.